Welcome to Pathways to Partnership, the podcast powered by Move America. Here, we explore the intersection of industry, government, and academia, where collaboration sparks innovation and strengthens our nation's defense industrial base. Each episode will bring you thought-provoking discussions, expert insights, and real-world success stories that showcase the pathways to building a stronger, more innovative defense industry. And now, here's your host, Rick from Move America.
Welcome back to Pathways to Partnership, the Move America podcast, where we shine a light on the people and programs shaping the future of collaboration across our industry. I'm Rick, your friendly neighborhood communications lead, and today we're diving into a topic that matters more now than ever: cybersecurity, especially for any business or entity seeking to work with the defense industrial base. In this episode, I'll be joined by Mariano Mattei. He's Vice President of Cyber Initiatives for Eccalon and Project Spectrum, which is the Department of Defense Office of Small Business Programs endorsed platform designed to help businesses strengthen their cybersecurity posture and meet the requirements needed to engage with the DoD. Mariano brings a wealth of knowledge about emerging threats, compliance challenges, and practical steps that organizations, including small and mid-sized businesses, can take to protect themselves and prepare for future opportunities. So let's go ahead and jump in. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you joining us today. Joining me is Mariano Mattei, VP of Cyber Initiatives at Eccalon. Mariano, introduce yourself before we jump into the serious stuff.
Sure. So Mariano Mattei, I'm Vice President of Cyber Initiatives at Eccalon. I've been active CISO consultant for the last 10 to 15 years. Before that as a cybersecurity expert, and before that as a software engineer.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate having you here. Now, I know everyone is eager to get into access control, Mariano. For someone unfamiliar with access control, how would you describe access control as it relates to securing data?
Yeah, great question. Access control is one of the foundations of cybersecurity, and you'll see it at the top of the list for most frameworks, things to do as a company. First things in CMMC, it's about deciding who can access your system's data and resources, and under what conditions. One of the founding principles is the principle of least privilege, which is key here because it means people can only get access to what they truly need to get access to in order to do their job and nothing more. Strong access controls are important for compliance standards like CMMC, HIPAA, NIST, but they're not something you set once and forget. Access control is about enabling the right people to have the right access at the right time. And that requires governance, right? That requires due diligence.
What would you say is the key difference between authentication and authorization?
Authentication is about proving who you are. It answers the question, who are you? And that could be proven through password, biometrics, a token. Once you prove who you are, authorization comes in afterwards. So that answers, what are you allowed to do? For example, you might log into a network but only see your department's files. Both need to work together. Without strong authentication, attackers can impersonate you. Without proper authorization, users may have access to sensitive data.
When you're talking about authentication and authorization as a tag team, there's actually control models, letters that get thrown around. It's RBAC and ABAC. Can you explain what RBAC and ABAC are and what the differences are?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me preface it by saying most small to mid-sized businesses are really concerned about CMMC. And one of the foundation principles that you have to understand is that as the owner of the data, it's really your responsibility to dictate who has access to that data. And there's many ways of doing it, but one of the more prevalent ways are through one, which is RBAC, which stands for role-based access control. And that gives access based on a person's role in an organization. So, for example, HR, finance, or IT. They may all have different access controls to only access the data that's relevant to their position and what they need to do on a daily basis. There's also something not quite as popular, but second, I would say, is attribute-based access control, or ABAC. So it's more dynamic. It uses attributes such as the time of day, your location, or device type in addition to the role. RBAC is simpler, widely used, but ABAC follows more fine-grained, flexible control. For example, I may be an IT person that has access to being able to reset users' passwords, for example. But if I access it from another country, I may have restrictions placed upon it.
Misconfigured access control. It shows up in the places you least expect and spreads faster than gossip at a family reunion. What do you think the greatest risks are?
One of the number one attack vectors, right? So misconfigured cloud environments, overly broad permissions, neglected accounts are still active after people leave a company. So attackers are always looking for these weak points because they provide easy entry into an organization. Layered security, zero trust, and very strong passwords.
Access controls really do need to be applied beyond obvious IT systems. It's not just the computer, it's cloud services, vendor portals, physical spaces. A lot of people don't think about the physical spaces when it comes to access control, but that's something that's really big because, once again, data could be everywhere. It's not just in the cloud and it's not just inside a device. It could be anywhere. And so it's really important to make sure that physical control is in there as well.
Yeah, and with most people, I shouldn't say most, but the majority of people probably have some cloud instance because it's scalable. Small to mid-sized businesses have that capital expense of having to buy that hardware up front, and you can scale in the cloud. So it's a little bit easier. And we see a lot of small to mid-sized businesses making use of the cloud. But they have physical locations. The cloud is someone else's computer. If you have paper documents, if you have server rooms, if you've got data that's highly sensitive, that's only accessible inside of a SCIF, let's say, that physical protection is important, which is why most frameworks have controls in place. We've got rules, right? So no tailgating, for example, is a big one. And protecting your ID badge. So when we leave our office, we're required to take our ID badge off and put it away. And hopefully within a protective RF protected enclosure, this physical security being a part of most frameworks, absolutely.
Some instances are going to be a threat. That's a real world situation, right?
Especially nowadays, and you could run it on your laptop and it'll do a really good job. So that's why it's important we say you should have a password for your loved one. If you have that password, even though it might sound like someone you know, you can say, what's our password? And if they don't know it, then it's fake.
Where do you think the line is between convenience and security when it comes to limiting access? Where can a business say they're on the safe side of things?
As a CISO, we tend to define everything as risk. Our job is to provide the C-level with risks alternatives, right? But the line really draws for us as a CISO at risk. So if the convenience exposes sensitive systems or data to an unnecessary risk, then the security has to take precedence. But a well-designed access control has to balance both, right? Ensuring security without making workflows impossible. A lot of people say the security team's job is to balance, allowing you to do your job without putting the business at risk. And it's difficult because everything changes. Now with AI, everything changes. We have to evaluate risk and make good decisions about cost and inconvenience versus security.
No, and that's excellent. That's an excellent point. Now, I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk timing when you get into the when of access control, because you mentioned this earlier, and I want to dive into it a little bit deeper. This is where things get precise as a Swiss watch, but hopefully less expensive, fewer tiny gears you inevitably lose. When should access be granted to a new employee or a contractor? More importantly, when should it be revoked?
A few things to note here happen right after the onboarding process. It is highly takes place in person because it's happening more often where an employee can pose as, let's say, a U.S. citizen or someone that is local. But it's important to have a remote workforce. But initial onboarding should be in person. Validate whether the person is who they say they are. Because I can fake my image, voice, past, LinkedIn profile, meet them in person. Give them access after they've been onboarding and all the documents for legal and HR have been signed. Revocation of that from a CISO's perspective, should happen before someone is let go or changes positions. They can initiate a 0-day. They can steal information. They could send a message back to home base. If you've decided to terminate someone, that access control should be done before you reach out to them. 1/3 of all breaches are from an insider threat. It's important for you as an organization to help prevent mistakes from happening.
And I think one of the things that has really come up, everybody talks about multi-factor authentication and about how that is critical. So I'm going to have you talk about that a little bit, but in explaining how MFA is beneficial, when does it get to be overkill? When is it necessary? And when have you gone a little too far?
MFA is really critical. I believe it's somewhere around 80 to 85% of attacks can be thwarted by proper MFA. Is it a pain? Yeah, no one likes to sit and type a 6-digit number or wait for an email. Sometimes it doesn't even arrive. But there are better ways where your phone pops up, you click a button, it sees you're the person you say you are, and it lets you in, and it's nearly seamless. But it's critical with sensitive data, right? So remote logins, cloud applications, sensitive data need MFA. Without a doubt, it should be implemented across the board. Low risk internal tools probably don't need MFA. The cost of MFA is often far less than the cost of a breach. So you have to balance that with what are you requiring MFA to access? So for example, maybe to log into your laptop, you may not need MFA, right? But to log into highly sensitive data systems, then you would need it. You don't want it to be inconvenient, but you also want to balance that with the sensitivity of the data.
And a lot of times MFA, like you're talking about a laptop. I know that the laptops have the fingerprint reader, so it's got the biometrics. That stuff it doesn't really work like that. That's just the movies.
It's not as easy as they make it out. Is it possible? Absolutely. But it's not that easy. Cyber criminals operate on the most cost-effective way to breach. And if the cost of trying to get in somewhere is more than the profit, they won't take that route. But the job really is to make it as hard as possible and very expensive for them to breach your organization.
Least privilege. It's such a foundational principle for modern cybersecurity. Explain least privilege and why that is such a big thing when it comes to controlling access to your data, to your systems, to your facility.
Yeah, it really is a foundational principle. In essence, it minimizes the potential damage of the breach, right? It limits what any one account can access, reduces the attack surface, and ensures that even if one account is compromised, the attacker reach is limited. If you have a flat organization where everybody has access to everything, you don't need to be an admin. You don't need special elevated privilege to access that data. It's foundational. I can't stress how important it is to define each person's role, what they should have access to and what they shouldn't have access to.
You mentioned zero trust, another core tenet of access control. How do you describe the zero trust model in simple terms, and what makes it so useful in today's threat landscape?
It's something most everybody's moving towards. It's difficult to implement because it's not the same for everybody. In essence, it means you never trust. You always verify. If I'm logged in and access a web application, it will verify I am who I'm supposed to be. Now, if I exit that site and I go back in an hour later, it will verify I am who I say I am and that I have access to that web application. So even if someone inside your network, they're constantly re-verified before granting access. So it's useful because it assumes that threats can come from inside or outside the network. Just because I have an admin password doesn't mean you shouldn't verify if I'm trying to squirrel away financial documents.
How have you seen access control evolving over recent years?
I've been a remote employee for 25 plus years. After the pandemic, that remote workforce, I don't think is ever going to go back to 100% in office. You've got the hybrid workforce, cloud environments, pretty much everything's remote. The focus is on continuous verification, adaptive policies, and automation to manage access. So access controls, you've seen it move from perimeter-based defenses to identity-driven security.
You've got this evolution of access control, which is a perfect segue into maybe these after the fact considerations, because there are a lot of people that will sit there and say, oh, I've already set up access control. I did that 2 years ago. I'm sure as somebody, who's a CISO, you love to hear that I heard it 2 years ago stuff. Once an organization establishes a zero trust model, puts authentication and authorization rules in place, what's next? Is the job done? Or are we talking about maintaining that classic car that we talked about before, where you need to constantly check under the hood, make sure nothing's starting to rust?
It's constant. The job is never done. Access control requires monitoring, auditing, continuous review, because threats evolve, roles change, systems get updated. So regular reviews make sure the access roles remain effective and aligned with the business needs. We recommend monthly. We have most of the clients that I've dealt with, there will be a monthly review of all access and a monthly review of elevated access. So we do a one-to-one check. Is this person still working here? Is this person still in this position? And we make sure that, at least on a monthly basis, that we verify and fix anything, and also document when we've missed something, because that you might have to take that back into your processes to figure out how you missed it. But it's constant.
We always tell people, cybersecurity is not a destination, it's a journey. There's no winning cybersecurity. You don't get to the end and say, I won. Even with CMMC, right? Because you become CMMC, you get that certification. And it really is a badge of honor, but it's something you've got to keep up with. It's not
Absolutely.
just something where 3 years later you want to look at it again.
Absolutely. That's the beauty. I think if you enjoy what you do, which I do, it's a daily exercise in maintaining that and keeping it the best it could possibly be.
All right, we're coming to the home stretch. Again, I always like to make sure that in Cyber Circuits, we're including some practical and actionable wisdom. This is where we go from theory to, okay, you've kept me up all night. Now what do I actually do tomorrow morning? If an organization wants to immediately shore up their defenses and want to start putting access control principles into play, what are their first steps? What are the basic things to get the ball rolling without requiring a PhD in cybersecurity or the budget of a small country?
First, to enable multi-factor authentication everywhere it's available. Not for your systems that aren't sensitive, but for anything that's valuable to your company. If you have a web application, if you have access that you have the ability to flip a little switch that says enable MFA, first thing, do that. I mean, that's an easy win right there. Secondly, I would do an audit of all your user accounts for unnecessary access and implement least privilege. Figure out, work it out. Where does each individual's role, what do they require to access? And limit that as best you can. And then from there, once you have those foundational basics in place, then you can start working towards zero trust model with ongoing monitoring and continuous improvement. But zero trust is a journey. A few years ago, we started seeing more attacks on hospitals. And that's when I said the gloves are off with cyber criminals. Windows 10 coming to end of life and everybody's worried. And you should be, because if they drop support, you don't get any more security fixes. But that doesn't mean that the cyber criminals aren't finding new ways to break into those systems. And once you get into one system, if they don't have things segmented or proper limited access controls in place, then they've got the keys to the kingdom. They get into one system, they get into your whole operation. The way to get around that is to have a coder develop an API. So you have a front end now that sits in front of those systems that has very strong authentication and authorization before they can even get into that system. Filling out a self-assessment or documenting doesn't give you a certification. Registering your score with SPURS for CMMC level 2 does not give you a certification. A certification can only be given by an audit performed by an authorized C3PAO, and that costs money. How much depends. You'd have to contact the C3PAO and get a cost estimate on that. We're software agnostic, solution agnostic. We don't make recommendations because it changes so drastically per person. What might work well for one company may not work at all for another company. So it's a difficult question to answer. You have to know what your requirements are, sensitivity of your data, where you're located, how many people you need to share that data. I hate to give you the CISO answer of it depends, but it depends.
A lot of that is very subjective, but there are qualified experts to help determine those requirements.
Really on a case-by-case basis. That's phenomenal. That's what we call an air gap. You've got an air gap. I've got to be in your facility to breach it.
But how secure is your facility? Can someone walk in through the loading dock and find their way to your printer, copier, file cabinet?
The biggest attack factor is through the internet.
And it's no longer just the guys in the hoodie with sunglasses. These are big enterprises.
It's the third largest gross national product. US, China, cyber criminals. There's a lot of money in cybercrime. All right.
We appreciate you joining us today.
Take care, everyone.
So that wraps up this episode of Pathways to Partnership. A huge thank you to Mariano Mattei for sharing his expertise and for the work Project Spectrum is doing to make cybersecurity more accessible for entities across the country. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe, share it with your network, and check out Project Spectrum's tools and resources to continue strengthening your cyber posture. And also don't forget to join us at moveamerica.org or on LinkedIn at moveamerica.org. We are here to help you in a number of ways. Check us out. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep your partnership strong, your cybersecurity stronger, and please, for the love of all things digital, stop clicking those suspicious links.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or professional advice. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily represent the views or positions of Whom America or its affiliates. Always consult with a qualified professional for advice specific to your circumstances. For more information about Move America and our mission to strengthen the defense industrial base through innovation and collaboration, visit us at www.moveamerica.org. Thank you for tuning in to Pathways to Partnership, powered by Move America. Until next time, stay inspired, stay innovative, and we'll speak with you soon.